Hey everybody, welcome back to day 2. Hopefully day 1 of this journey was yesterday for you, but if day 1 was last week and now you're just getting to day 2, that's okay. Glad you're checking this out. Our prayer is that this would help just kind of get you down that road of following Jesus daily, that it's not something that we just do once a week, but it is an invitation to daily take up our cross and follow him. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus challenges us with these words. He uses a metaphor to describe how we know we're following after him. And here's how he puts it. He says, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many people enter through it." But then he goes on to say that small is the gate and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. And so the question for us as we consider what it means to follow Jesus is a question of what path we're on. Am I on a wide path that's pretty easy and comfortable and pretty crowded, frankly? A lot of people are on it. Or am I on a narrow path that can be difficult and challenging and requires sacrifice and only a few find it? If I were honest, and I will be, I would tell you that early on in my preaching and teaching, I tried to talk people into following Jesus. I kind of sold it. I made following Jesus sound as appealing, as comfortable, as convenient as possible. My intentions were good. I thought, look, I want to get as many people on board as possible. The best way to get a lot of people on board is to make it sound appealing and to make it sound easy. So my intentions were good, but my interpretation was bad, because that's not at all how Jesus defines what following him looks like. And one of the reasons I wrote the book, Not a Fan, was just to consider how Jesus defined what it meant to follow him. In other words, I want to set aside my presuppositions and set aside what I want to be true, and I want to look at what he says, what is actually true when it comes to following Jesus. And it's why I really keep looking for new ways to encourage people and challenge people to seek Jesus daily. You know, we tend to get dependent on other people spoon feeding us. And maybe some of you are like that. You want someone like me, or you want a pastor or an author or a teacher to always be feeding you. And that's helpful and it's convenient. I have a lot of those people in my life. But what we really want is to be in a daily relationship with Jesus, where we learn to come and we learn to sit at his feet and we learn to listen to him with a soft heart and with open eyes. And so I really hope that's the journey that you're looking to be on. Jesus is not a Tball coach. I don't know what kind of Tball coach you had, or what kind of athletic coach you might have had when you were growing up. But I had a Tball coach who, was just a super encouraging guy and would always pat me on the head and tell me I did a good job, even though I was in right field picking dandelions. And, the highlight of the Tball career for me was the snow cone I would get afterwards, and my Tball coach would make sure everybody got a trophy at the end of the season. And I guess in my mind, that's how a lot of people picture Jesus. They kind of think of a Tball coach, somebody who always has a smile on his face, kind of a Mr. Rogers of Nazareth type. And instead, what we find is that Jesus is very challenging when he talks to us about following him. And he describes it as this narrow path that's difficult at times, and really only a relative few choose to take it. And so the Jesus that I am growing to know more and more is oftentimes unsettling. He's oftentimes countercultural in kind of an uncool way, and he tells the truth even when it's not what we want to hear. It's because he loves us so much, though, that he will do this. He'll talk a lot about the narrow path, and that's why Jesus will teach more about repentance than forgiveness, and more about surrender than salvation, more about sacrifice and happiness, more about death than about life. He's constantly pointing us towards a narrow path. And so following Jesus is not easy. And when we read through the Gospels about Jesus inviting people to follow him, It wasn't an invitation to a life of convenience and comfort. Instead, oftentimes, those people who decided to follow Jesus took a narrow path that ended up being very difficult. So just honestly, I mean, how are you with this? Are you following Jesus on a road less traveled? If you are, I just want to remind you that you are not walking alone. It may be a difficult road, but He is with you every step of the way. And part of walking this road means that you learn to walk with His grace and you learn to walk with His strength, knowing that He's going to give you what you need every step of the way as you follow hard after Him. So here's what I'd like you to do today is just to get out a pen and paper and describe some ways which it's hard for you to follow Jesus. Look, if the path is narrow and difficult, how is it narrow? How is it difficult for you? And if you're having a hard time answering that question, like if you can't really describe ways that following Jesus is uncomfortable or inconvenient, then maybe it's good to just ask yourself what path you're on. Because I think sometimes we assume that we're on this narrow path that leads to life, when maybe we've chosen a wide path, the easy path, the comfortable path instead. So think just a few minutes about your journey, your spiritual journey as you follow Jesus. Is it difficult? Is it challenging? Does it require some sacrifice, some discomfort? If not, maybe you just ask yourself, what path have you chosen today?